actually, I suspect he'll introduce himself. So can you please welcome our esteemed guest, John Maddog Hall.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll get my notebook out. I actually did a real talk, with like slides and, overheads and circles and arrows in the back of each one, stuff like that. But unfortunately, I didn't quite communicate to the group here that we needed to get a LCD projector.
Sorry.
And so I'm basically going to keep them up here so I know what I'm talking about. But I think I can do this talk without slides, okay? So the first slide says, effective Linux evangelism, guerrilla tactics for the masses, okay? And it's really nice because all this is done against a globe of the world spread out, which I think is actually one of the strongest parts of the open source movement. The fact that it's around the world. In fact, I put out to people a lot that Linux is the only operating system in major uses today that was started outside the United States. All of the other operating systems, whether it be MVS, VMS, Unix itself, BSD, whatever, even though people worked on them all over the world, they were all under the control of some group of people that were inside of the United States. And so when you go to Germany and you talk about Linux, they treat Linux as if it's theirs. You go to Sweden and talk about Linux and they treat Linux as if it was theirs. China is the same thing. And the great part about it is they're all correct. Okay, so that's why I like to use the world globe as a background. It's really nice, kind of. Just wish you could see it.
I can almost see it.
Yeah, well, I promised to give these slides to your webmaster after the talk, and they can put it up there. And of course, I did them in Open Office, so people can use it. And Mr. Gates can put it on his Windows system. Okay, now the second slide says trademarks. It's very important. My lawyers tell me I always have to talk about trademarks. Linux is a trademark of Linus Torvalds. Okay. Now, if it was up to Linus, he would have everything called Linux. He would have a brand of shirts called Linux, a brand of cars called Linux, and stuff like that. In fact, for a while, he wanted to put the term Linux into the public domain. But the problem with that is when you do that, then you can't keep anybody from using it for any purpose. And then we would have pornography sites called Linux and stuff. And this almost happened one time. And if it was up to Linus, that probably would be okay, but too bad his wife doesn't like that, so Linus doesn't think it's a good idea either. And therefore we have to protect it, we have to keep it and license it. We've done that. We've created a little site, linuxmark.org, that if you want to use the term Linux for any legitimate purpose, all you do is you go to that site and say, I'd like to use this. We charge a small fee only to commercial users for it so that we can pay for the costs of the legal organization to license it out and to do the legal fights we sometimes have to do. But there's no profit-making thing on it. And the next trademark I have to mention is that Unix is a trademark of Xopen. Of course, Unix is used as a branding mechanism that you could have any operating system you could call Unix as long as it passes certain tests that Xopen gives against it. And this is why we were able to call our operating system the digital made, based on OSF1, we could call it digital Unix, while SCO could call theirs SCO Unix, even though it's two different bases of code, because they both fit the Xopen series of. Now, unfortunately, we cannot say that Linux is like Unix, because if we do, that's saying that, in effect, Linux has passed this set of test suites, which it hasn't. Number one, those test suites cost about $120,000 to rent from Xopen. And the second thing is that they test for a series of things that, in reality, nobody cares about anymore, like common desktop environment, CDE, and the RFS file system. How many of you use the RFS file system in your daily work? Okay. Okay. So, you know, so in reality, and the other thing about it is, of course, that maybe in the early days of Linux, it would have made a difference, you know, when there was 124,000 versions or Linux systems out there, and there was about 2 to 3 million Unix systems out there. It might have made a difference, but now there's 40 million Linux systems out there, and still only about 3 million Unix systems out there. I don't think it means as much of a difference anymore. In fact, it's probably more that the Unix people would like to say that Unix is like Linux. And I think we can go along with this, because if you say Unix is like Linux, except it costs a lot of money, and typically you can only get it in binary form, and it's a little bit different as it comes with different manufacturers and things like that. Now, if you take this a step further, of course, you realize we can describe everything in terms of Linux. And this brings about what the politicians have always known, that it doesn't make any difference whether your name is associated with something good or bad, as long as it's in the press. I mean, certainly Microsoft knows this. I mean, their name is in the press all the time. They keep pushing Windows, 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 and it's incredibly bad. So they know that the number of times your name is seen. So if we said that Windows is like Linux, except for the fact you can only run one application at a time, and it costs a lot of money, and you'll never see the source code, and you have to Control-Alt-Delete several times a year. Then we can do that for the day, yeah. Now, if this brings about an interesting thing, and you can do this. You can go to your favorite search engine on the web and search for 3 words. One of them is Linux, one's Microsoft, and one's sex. And you'll find out that Linux comes out first, Microsoft is second, and sex is third. There's something wrong with that. When I figured that out, I'll tell you. But the last bullet on my slide up here, which you would see if I was projecting it, but you can't because we don't have one. And I normally wouldn't even read this bullet, but I'd hate to have it go past without you knowing what it says. Misinformation is a trademark of Microsoft. All right, so this talk tonight was about how could you present to various people an argument about using Linux and open source. And so I've broken this down into some points that I think have been successful for me over the years. And I have 5 points on my slides here. The first point is know your audience. The second point is think about solving their problems, not your problems. Okay. The next point is talk their language. The next point is keep it short. That's something I'm going to violate tonight. And then finally, special topic slide, okay? So the first point in the title of the next slide, which you would see if I had a projector, is know your audience.
You're killing me, Cal.
Now, underneath of know your audience, I have 2 sub-bullets. Solve their problems and talk their language. Okay. Now, the reason I'm bringing this about, solve the problems and talk their language, is that every audience you talk to, a lot of times can be a different topic or subject. If you talk to business, that's one type of topic you're talking about. If you're talking to government, there's different issues that they want to go into. If you're talking to software people or people who are building a software product, that's still yet another type of audience. And so, and we'll go over each one of these and what the hot buttons are that I found for each one. And then, in knowing your audience, you also a lot of times have to keep it short. There are times where, like a group like this, you're all Linux advocates, I could stand up here for hours and talk. You sit there and listen, right? But when you're talking to a Windows person, you know, their mindset is a little shorter than that, and they want to know right away as to why, you know, Linux is good for them. So let's talk about the 3 different markets: business, educational, and government. Those